Right, component 2, continuity of life, a taskbook, and we are up to variation and evolution, and it is question 8 we're looking at. And it's an excerpt from Steve Jones, a prominent geneticist. He's always on the TV and the radio. I've had lunch with him. Very entertaining character. And you've heard of Darwin's finches. Every time we talk about Darwin, we have to talk about finches for some reason. And we've got a large finch and a small finch. The large one eats nuts, and the smaller ones, little soft fruits and things. So two types of finches. And we've got a little bit of information about the local weather system. El Nino, you might have heard about that, and global warming and global weather patterns. But we've got kind of essentially two types of weather. We've got kind of the normal weather, in which there's not a lot of food, and we've got the El Nino weather, loads of rain, lots of plants, loads of food for the finches. So two types of finches, big one and a small one, and the fossil record shows those two in existence for ages and ages. And two types of weather, normal weather and El Nino weather. And normal weather doesn't produce much food. El Nino weather produces lots and lots of food. And drought follows the El Nino. So part A, describe the main adaptation the larger finch would enable it to feed successfully. It says it hard nuts, so you can guess here that it's got a kind of a bigger beak, more powerful, stronger beak, that sort of thing. So I'm just going to put a stronger beak for crushing nuts. So any answer along on those lines will do there. So it's just you thinking about the advantage that and adaptations. The two types of finches are example of different not genera. So that's the level of organisation above species. And what information have we got? We've got many fertile hybrid finches. So these are where the big finch and the little finch are able to interbreed and hatched. Okay. And they say they're fertile. So we are now going to our species definition, if we can remember that. Species is ability to interbreed to produce fertile offspring. So, are they separate? Are they unable to interbreed? No. So, actually, they're not species. So, the only one left to us is variety, which is like a level below species. So, still able to interbreed. That's the key bit of information there. They're able to interbreed and produce a fertile offspring. And our explanation is just going to be along those lines. So they can interbreed to produce fertile offspring on the fertile hybrids. And that's just from, we've got all of these kind of 3 marks from the ability to remember our definition and apply it. Part C, what effect would you expect with the arrival of El Nino to have on the finch population? And there's only 1 mark here, so we're just going to make a general statement about the kind of the whole finch population. And it said lush and abundant vegetation, so more food, more population. So population would increase. And then we've got 2 marks here. So the first one's possibly a little bit more obvious to say. So lush and abundant vegetation is going to be more food. So more vegetation, so more food available. And then we actually have to link this to, well, how would the population actually increase? So more survival and breeding. And so the population would increase. Part D, suggest why many hybrid forms are hatched. This is a little bit more tricky. If there's two types of birds and a bigger population, then it's more likely they'll come into contact and breed with each other because there's more food, bigger population. So less separation of these two sets of birds. So less separation of the two types in a large population. So increased contact. The competition is most severe under either of these two, and we're not circling, we're ticking this time. So remember with these two we've got normal is not much food, El Nino is lots of food. So we'd expect more competition when there's not as much food available. So we're going to tick normal conditions and just write out the explanation for that. So more competition for less food. So less food available, so more competition for that food resource. Therefore, what does the fossil record tell us about what happens when El Nino ebbs away? So the fossil record talked about these two types. It doesn't mention much about lots of hybrids being available in the fossil record. So just those kind of two types. So the hybrids are not there in the fossil record, so can't survive, they must disappear, that sort of thing. So the hybrids, do not survive, and that ties in with less of them, with a higher competition. And we just need to explain why these hybrids are disappearing. Well, these hybrids are fine when there's plenty of food, but when there's less food, our specialists have an advantage. Our specialist nut crackers or specialist kind of little fruit feeders. So in the drought conditions, specialist feeders are best adapted. They're better adapted and they can compete more successfully. So compete more successfully. And the intermediates starve. And that, as Darwin says, is by means of natural selection. So that's the key word. You might put survival of the fittest here, but natural selection is probably the best phrase here. What might happen to the finch population over a long time if El Nino became permanent? So remember, El Nino, lots of nice weather, lots of plants, lots of food. So the population will get very big. So probably just one big population. So one big population. And what would they look like? Well, it would kind of be intermediate. The specialist feeders don't really have that much of an advantage. So of intermediates, or the hybrid form. You know, lots of food, specialists not at an advantage. So abundant food, specialist feeders not at the advantage. In fact, they're probably just at a disadvantage if they can only eat one food type. So at a disadvantage. So actually these intermediates are the general feeders. When there's lots of food, they're at the advantage. And the other way around, if El Nino disappeared permanently, so we never had nice weather, we always had drought, then these specialist feeders will be at the kind of permanent advantage, and we never see any of the intermediates. So, and remember back to there, we were talking about, are they different species, these two? We said no, they're just varieties. Well, probably if there was a permanent drought, then these would become so separate that they'd actually become two species. So we get speciation emerging. So two separate species of finch. And as we said, species, they're now in case, if they're separate species, they can't interbreed with the other species, to produce fertile offspring. And here, the isolation of the two varieties becomes permanent. We never get any of those intermediates forming because we've never got the brilliant weather that's going to give us lots of food. So the isolation is permanent, there's never lots of food in the El Nino. And that's 18 marks.